Who's ahead? Excited or scared? I grinned. When we were little, whenever we had mixed feelings about something, Owen and I'd pretend those feelings were running in a race. We hadn't done it in a long time, though. Excited is way ahead, but scared is coming on strong, I said. I bet if I asked you to raise your hand, anybody who can relate to this idea of excited and scared, running a race and vying for who comes out ahead, many of you could relate to that. I know for me, I am an instructional coach in a K-6 school, and we've started back with teachers over the last 2 weeks, and I am both excited to have them back and then to greet kids back next week, and a little scared and confused about what's happening right now in education and in our buildings. So I imagine that you also might have mixed feelings. Maybe you're a parent of a student who's going back, or maybe you're a parent of a student who's staying home, or maybe you just retired from education, or maybe you've got another stake in the game, and it's not an easy time to be involved in schools reopening. So I want to use today's lesson and today's Write Like to give us an opportunity to talk about that. And just like we did on Tuesday with the Write About, we're going to focus on that emotional connection today. This is actually something I was able to do with my teachers this week. As we entered into PLCs, I used this exact lesson as our greeting. It took about maybe 10 minutes, and we entered our Write Likes into the chat and just got a chance to recognize and see each other through the lens of Cynthia's writing and through the lens of Emma's character. So super fun. I can't wait. Here's our target for today. I can write like an author by closely studying her topics, work, and craft moves so that I can discover ways to share my stories with the world. And as I counted out those 3 things, yes, this week we are going through all 4 steps in the Write Like process, with that 4th one being the Write Like, so that you'll have an opportunity to try this out in the way that Emma and Owen introduced us to this strategy. So with that in mind, I already read the first part of the excerpt, so let's jump into topics. If you were with us on Tuesday, you know we did some work around emotional intelligence and strategies for getting out of thinking traps, and use this as a way of getting smarter about how we talk about and think about our emotions. So we're going to continue that thread today as we think about what are the topics in this first chapter or this excerpt. And I think we named things like change, transition, and mixed emotions, not just one emotion. So in order to start us with topics today, it's super important that you have a writer's notebook or some other way of capturing your thinking, because I'm going to introduce you to something you might actually already be familiar with. This is, you'll see it pop up right here, hopefully, is the change curve, or one iteration of it. There are lots out there. The more I Google it, the more often I Google it, the farther down this one particular version of it falls. But I like this version of the change curve for a couple of reasons. One, it shows us these stages of left to right, these stages of change that are, and I love that word stages even because it makes it seem like, this is something that's normal. This is the natural process. I also love that I can kind of cluster those emotions into those different stages. The other thing I like about this is that tumble at the bottom, although sometimes I feel like the arrows go the other way. And it's also a natural part of the process to take that 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and to get caught up in that kind of tumultuous move from disruption to exploration. And using this has really helped us over the past couple of years in order to name emotions that we were feeling. And in this case today, we're going to take it to that next step and really look at mixed emotions. So topics really can be grounded in this. If you have an emotion but you don't see it registered on here, that's okay. We're going to just use this as an inspiration or a kind of a word splash that we could use it as a jumping off place. So with that in mind, let's go into the work. Now, this work is not necessarily something that I think Cynthia did in order to write this chapter, but it's something I'm going to ask us to do so that we're better prepared to write like her in the next step. So step 2 is the work. And what I want us to do right now is to use this change curve or some other strategy you might have in mind for noticing and naming your emotions. And I'm going to encourage us, I'm going to go a little bit deeper with that. I don't usually use multiple sources in a write like, but in this case, I'm going to, because I think it's really important, especially as we have students coming back to us in the coming weeks, that we recognize how valuable and important this step, this work really is. So I'm going to read to you a quick excerpt that's linked on the blog from Greater Good magazine. It's about the movie Inside Out. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a movie about a girl named Riley who's going through some really hard transitions in her life, and the 4 emotions that are trying to save her or keep her whole through that experience. So let me just read to you what the experts are saying about this movie. When this article was written back in 2015. At one point in the movie, Joy attempts to prevent sadness from having any influence on Riley's psyche by drawing a small circle of sadness in chalk and instructing sadness to stay within it. It's a funny moment, but psychologists will recognize that Joy is engaging in a risky behavior called emotional suppression, an emotion regulation strategy that has been found to lead to anxiety and depression, especially amongst teenagers whose grasp of their own emotions is still developing. Sure enough, trying to contain sadness and deny her a role in the action ultimately backfires for Joy and for Riley. So I start with that part or that excerpt because I think some of us might have a tendency to name an emotion we wish we felt or name an emotion we think is expected of us. I was in a meeting, probably 3 weeks ago with a group of leaders, and I was struck by some of the remarks that were made about how we need to have a brave face and we need to be excited and jazzed and all smiles, full steam ahead. And I couldn't help but feel that not only was that not a true reflection of how I was feeling, not a full reflection of how I was feeling, but that wouldn't necessarily be a true reflection of how our teachers and our students would be feeling. That to say or insist that we're on this right side of the curve can be really dangerous. And so when I read this part, I go, oh my gosh, yes, that would be emotional suppression if we denied feelings that were on the left side of the curve just because they were uncomfortable or didn't feel good, right? So let me keep going in the article. Toward the end of the movie, Joy does what some researchers now consider to be the healthiest method for working with emotions. Instead of avoiding or denying sadness, Joy accepts sadness for who she is, realizing that she is an important part of Riley's emotional life. Emotion experts call this mindfully embracing an emotion. What does that mean? Rather than getting caught up in the drama of an emotional reaction, a mindful person kindly observes the emotion without judging it as the right or wrong way to feel in a given situation, creating space to choose a healthy response. Indeed, a 2014 study found that depressed adolescents and young adults who took a mindful approach to life showed lower levels of depression, anxiety, and bad attitudes, as well as a greater quality of life. Isn't that what we want for everybody, right? Our colleagues, our families, our students, our leaders, to kind of mindfully embrace our emotions, which I think is why this chapter just speaks to me so clearly, because I want to give us a chance now to write like Cynthia. So in order to do the work right now, what I want you to do is to mindfully embrace whatever emotion you're feeling, whether it's reflected on this curve or not. And I want you to jot it down. I'm going to encourage you to choose 2 emotions like Cynthia does. Remember, excited and scared? I want you to think about what is the mixture of emotions you might be feeling. And they could both be on the left side of the curve. They could both be on the right side of the curve. Neither one of them could be on the curve at all. But I want you to do that work right now of mindfully embracing those. And just jot them down. So when I think about mine, right now, it would be fear and hope. One from the left, one from the right. I feel like I go back and forth all the time. All right. Now let's take a close look at the excerpt and focus on the craft. What does she do? So in that part I read right at the start of the lesson, what does she do as a writer in order to share this element of the story? In this case, it's Emma's story, right? So I look and I see she's using dialogue between the older brother and the younger brother. So mentor and apprentice, right? She's naming mixed feelings, and I want you to notice she's personifying them, right? Like we could tell that because she's putting them in a race, but she's even using them as proper nouns. She's giving them a capital letter at the beginning to indicate that they are names and kind of have that level of authority in this piece. I notice in that third paragraph that I read, it says, I grin. So we've got some character reactions to each other. And again, some dialogue. So now let's keep going with the excerpt on the back page as Owen continues. He says, maybe Excited has marbles in her pocket, Owen said, and she drops them on the track so Scared will slip on them. I imagined Excited pulling a whole handful of marbles out of her pocket and dropping them one by one. Again, this is character reaction to each other, dialogue. And then we've got a continuation of that personification, but with a new image, right? Not just running in the race. Now we're dropping marbles in the race. So we're creating a really nice sensory image for our readers, as well as for the characters, for our characters, as well as for our reader. And then the last part of the excerpt goes like this. Thank you, Mom. I love it all, but my stomach's too jumpy to eat. I thought about school all summer, but now the big day was tomorrow. Little worries were creeping in. What if the other kids knew things that I didn't? What if everyone already had their own friends and didn't want more? Scared jumped right over those marbles. So again, we've got a continuation of that image, and now we've got to shift to internal dialogue. Something else I noticed is that in this internal dialogue, or in the narrative part that's not spoken dialogue, is some background information. This is the very first chapter of the story. So up until now, I didn't know it was Emma's first day tomorrow. On the first side, I didn't know that she and Owen used to pretend that their emotions were running in a race. So we get a little backstory or background in this piece. So I'm jotting those things down right on my text here. And now it's time to give it a try. So we've done step 1, topics, step 2, work, step 3, craft moves. And I wanted to kind of just share with you a couple of examples that some teachers used and then my own. So when I was in my first round of PLCs, I gave this to my team, and one of my teachers actually took that idea of marbles and suggested that her emotions really feel like they are on a marble run. So not marbles dropping to trip one emotion over the other, but in a marble run. And so we joked about this idea of the toilet bowl part of the marble run, where you're not quite sure which marble is going to drop out the hole first, or the really steep ones where they're following each other one by one down the ramps or spinning the wheels or those kinds of things. And that same teacher stopped by today and we talked exactly about that. And she said, I was going to write more. I would have written more. And that's the whole idea. When we latch onto a technique like this, it allows us to really focus on sharing our own story. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and start mine. I chose those 2 words, fear and hope. I'm going to go ahead and post this little bit of a snippet of a try it to the blog. And then you'll see, once I've finished writing it, you'll see kind of the result and see what came of it. Because this is one I want to try and write the whole scene through. So let me start here. I'm going to start with Owen's question. Who's ahead? And then I'm going to use my 2 emotions, fear or hope. Now, this wouldn't be Owen asking me. If it were anybody, it would be my husband or my daughter. And yet they don't talk like this, but I'm going to let that go for right now. This isn't a question. This is more likely a question I would ask them than that they would ask me. But I'm going to go ahead and put my husband in here because he's the most likely one for me to have this conversation with. So then I noticed back in the text, gosh, what would I say next? So Owen asked the question and then it says, I grinned. So I think the next thing I would do is react. So if my husband asked me that, who's ahead? Fear or hope? I just did it. Did you see? That's the reaction. So I'm going to put down, I sighed, right? This isn't a question right now for me that I would grin at. I'm going to sigh. I let out all the air in my lungs. It had been a full day of Zoom meetings. Raise your hand. Anyone else? Zoom meetings. And kids would be back to school now in less than a week. Fear followed me home, I said. I'm going to stay in the past tense just like Cynthia does. And I'm going to keep writing this. I think it's really therapeutic actually right now just to have named fear. And I'm going to actually go back and double check. I did not capitalize them, which is interesting. So I'm going to go back and make that correction right now. For the rest of my Write Like, you're welcome to check it out on the blog. But more importantly, I encourage you to give this one a try. If I were starting back with a group of students next week, I would be doing this lesson with them, and I would be giving them an opportunity to name their emotions and to picture them running in the race or having a water balloon fight or any number of things that would get us talking about them in a way that makes it seem less daunting and scary and less overwhelming and more normal to be experiencing a range of emotions. So that was my goal today with today's Write Like. I would love for you to share on Facebook in the blog comments your iterations so that I can share a copy of this text with you and get it into your hands and so that you can share it with your students. So until next week, my friends, take care. Happy Thursday.